What's up, everybody? It's Catfish on Ice, special edition, episode 223. It is trade deadline week, just a few days away from the trade deadline. We're coming up to you on a Tuesday. I've got an awesome guest joining me. It's Clay Brewer. He's been on the show a few episodes ago. He's back from Nashville Hockley Now. Clay, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. It's kind of a rainy day in Nashville, but I'm still excited to talk Preds hockey. That always kind of lightens my day, so it'll be fun.
Definitely. We are gearing up for a busy week. We've already got some big news that dropped yesterday. Of course, Tommy Novak was re-signed. Finally, they made us wait it out a little bit, but he got re-signed for 3-year contract extension. We're going to get into the numbers with Clay on that, what that means for the rest of the lineup and the trade deadline. Of course, we're going to get into the last-minute trade deadline plans for the Predators because they were once for sure heavy sellers. Now we don't know for sure if that's going to be the case. A lot of uncertainty surrounding the Predators coming up on Friday. Want to also get into the future roadmap for Juuse Saros. Since the trade speculations have cooled off a lot, doesn't look like he's going to be traded now, but of course you never really know for sure. So I want to get Clay's thoughts on what he thinks is coming. Is a contract extension coming soon? Really have to dive more into that. And then we're going to talk about the win streak. 8 in a row for the Predators now. They are 3 wins away from setting a new franchise record, which would be 11 in a row. They're playing the Canadiens tonight at home to get that win streak to 9. We're going to break down the next 3 opponents, which are teams out of a current playoff spot. But we know you can never look at a matchup on paper. You've got to take every team like they are a Stanley Cup contender. Take them seriously. All right, Clay, let's get into it with you here. And let's talk about it. Let's bring up the Tommy Novak extension. I read your thoughts on it. You seem to be a huge fan of this deal for both sides. It's a good deal for Novak, in my opinion. 3 years is a perfect time frame for a player like Tommy Novak to really prove himself to this franchise. He gets a decent raise. He's about to be 27 years old, so I think this is perfect for Novak. Obviously, it's a team-friendly deal. What do you say about it, Clay?
I agree. I mean, we've heard Elliot Friedman and others speak about how a lot of teams were interested in Tommy Novak. So I think that he brings a lot of offensive upside. He kind of reached his peak a bit later in his career, but ever since last year, he's been basically a point-per-game player. Other than the injury, kind of got him a bit behind this past year. But 3.5 times 3, I think, is a phenomenal deal. I tweeted out where I didn't think that he would get into the 4s just because that wouldn't be in Nashville's best interest. He could have possibly gotten that on the open market because, again, he's a very sought-after player. I was a bit surprised that it was in the 3-year range. I think that by taking the lower deal, that it would have been maybe at least 4 years to take him to year 30 to being 31 years old. But I think it just shows that he loves being in Nashville and he wanted to stay. But 3.5 times 3, I think you couldn't really get any better than that.
Yeah, and I saw the number of $4 million per year was kind of where the Predators and Barrie Trotz might have jumped off the wagon and would have maybe considered trading Tommy Novak on before Friday's deadline. Do you see that was kind of the cutoff number? Maybe if it would have gotten to that total value of $11 million, reached that $4 million range, do you think that would have been the jumping off point for Barrie Trotz?
It definitely would make sense. I think that signing a lot of with the McCarron and Smith contracts, you showed they're taking little money to stay on board. I think that I'm very adamant on Trotz making a big splash this summer, so he needs to rack up some salary cap to take advantage of making a big move, perhaps whether it's an offer sheet or making a trade or otherwise come this summer. But I think that would have been the cutoff for sure. I think when he went on 102.5 with Jared Stillman and kind of said, we're either going to have a deal done this week or part ways, I think that was kind of a shot across the bow. And Novak and his agent didn't call bluff there. They wanted to stay in Nashville, so they kind of took maybe the lesser money they might have gotten on the free market.
Yeah, definitely. And then, of course, with Novak falling off the board and now being signed, that hurts a lot of teams out there, some playoff contending teams who were really salivating at the chance to sign a Tommy Novak. The New York Rangers were the team that really got connected the most to Novak. What do you think if it would have came down to that, Clay? What do you think Novak could have gotten for the Preds in return? if they would have decided to trade him. And how would have that affected the playoff push? Because if you ask me personally, trading Novak would have made more sense before this 8-game winning streak. Let's say the Predators were down there far back in the standings, where kind of where the Wild are and the Flames and the Blues. If they were that far out of the playoffs, would have maybe made a little bit more sense to trade Novak. But after this 8-game winning streak, all bets are off. You got to play to win. You can't. What does that send to the locker room if you're an 8-game winning streak, you're in a playoff spot, and you start trading away assets like Tommy Novak? But what do you think Novak would have gotten in a trade if it would have happened?
I think he could have reached the first-round pick. I really do, simply because he's a UFA, so he only has an $800,000 cap hit, and then prorated. That's nominal money for any contender. Really, anyone in the league could afford that simply. And then the ease at which he plays the game, he's very offensively, like upside, right? Offensively, he's not the fastest guy, but the way he controls the puck, the way he moves it, I think the Colorado game was exhibit A of what peak Tommy Novak can be. The pass from behind the net to Glass for the goal, the pass from Saros, and then him literally undressing Bowen Byram, who's not a bad defenseman whatsoever, to put it into the back of the net. That's peak Tommy Novak, and I think that might have sealed the deal after that game, that Barry Trotz wanted to keep him around. I know there was a debate at the beginning of the season whether Cody Glass or Tommy Novak might be the second center behind O'Reilly, for now at least. And both of them getting injured kind of put that question aside and up in question perhaps. But I truly believe that Tommy Novak is a second center for this team. Whether O'Reilly is the long-term solution, he obviously isn't for the first-line center, so that's probably the biggest target, in my opinion, the Preds should be focusing in on. But locking up Novak for 3 years, I think, really fits in with this trajectory of the Brunette offense and hopefully what Trotz is seeking to build in Nashville soon.
I'm glad you bring up this topic of Novak being the true second-line center, which is such an important position to have locked up and figured out, especially if you're a team like the Preds who are going through what you would call a retool and not a rebuild. That's the term they like to use. And so I do wonder about Ryan O'Reilly's. I mean, obviously we expect O'Reilly to be around for a couple more seasons after this, definitely, but is he the true long-term answer at 1C? Probably not. Could Novak eventually outplay this current contract he just got, and before he hits age 30 really turn into a 1C? We don't really know that. We can't say that right now. We do know that he has enormous breakout potential, which is the reason why I love this deal so much for the Preds, is the breakout potential that Novak has. And I've been saying that for months now, that I really did not want to lose Novak, even through a trade, even with the first round pick, only because the ceiling is so high for Novak, and I would never be able to live with it, seeing Novak go to another team and just really break out like a lot of people expect him to, especially considering he's a homegrown talent for this Nashville Predators franchise. So it makes me wonder about Cody Glass, who is really, really starting to get hot right now at the right time. I mean, he gets a hat trick against the Avalanche. Very emotional to see him post-game, and eventually you would love Glass to turn into a top 6 center as well. What do you think about that, Clay?
I think he's really excelled at the wing. And I was looking at maybe the lines, because there's 9 outstanding positions technically going into the summer. But I like Glass maybe with Novak. It was kind of interesting. He's playing with, I think, Colton Sissons right now. Yeah. But I think that if Glass can really find his game, he's struggled in his career just with injuries. I mean, it's super hard to beat that. But I mean, Cody Glass is still only 24 years old. I know he was a high draft pick, was drafted at 18 years old, and so we feel like he's 40 years old already, right? But he's still just now coming into his game, and I think that Tommy Novak, in my opinion, has won that second center position. But I have no issues with Cody Glass going to the wing, because you have a multitude of centers in the pipeline, whether it's Juuse Saros, Fyodor Svechkov, and others. There's a lot of optimism, I think, in Nashville up the middle. And that's been a position they've really lacked for a long time.
Yeah, so we're looking at J Fresh Hockey on X, who puts out all the amazing player cards out there, tracks all of the data and stuff. Basically echoes what a lot of people feel about Novak, which is that there's potential breakout candidacy for Novak if he can get more minutes, which is interesting. I saw that floating around a lot. Maybe people who don't watch the Predators on a nightly basis like we do, Novak does not get the elevated ice time that you would expect, but he is such an efficient player. Novak is. He's so very interesting over the last this current season and then all of last season. Novak has registered the third most points for this Predators team, only behind Philip Forsberg and Roman Josi. 77 points for Novak over the last 2 seasons combined, obviously with plenty of time to add to that total for the rest of this season. So, I mean, so much efficiency. Do you expect to see Novak's minutes begin to grow after the trade deadline, Clay?
I would hope so. He's getting more power play time. I mean, we have Ryan O'Reilly who skates 20, 22 minutes a night, but he plays power play, he plays penalty kill, he plays even strength, where Novak doesn't play on penalty kill. But I definitely agree with you, and Novak still has the potential to break out and potentially become that number one center. I don't want to jump to that conclusion, but just today's athlete with nutrition and strength and everything, I've always believed recently in the last few years that someone's prime is more so between 28 and 32. And so he's still not even on that minimum age of 28 yet. So next year is really going to be interesting. At the beginning of this season, Barry Trotz was talking about analytically he performing astronomically above the mean, and so a reversion was needed. I think we saw a bit of that this year, especially when he came back from his injury, but now he's starting to really heat up. So with this price value, I have no issues. You don't want to be locked into like a Kuznetsov situation, for example, where you're paying someone $7.8 million and have to maybe waive him. But 3.5 for 3 years is absolutely, I think it's honestly a steal in my opinion.
I think so too.
Across the league might have been introduced to Tommy Novak for the first time this season, but you most certainly notice him on the ice every time you watch a Preds game.
Yeah, definitely. And the timing is so great. I love the 3-year window. It's perfect. Just as you said, he's going into the prime of his NHL career. And really, he's just getting started. I mean, this is really his first full season in the NHL where he hasn't had to think about getting sent back down to the minor leagues at all. So he's just getting started. He's just getting started in a lot of ways.
And what I love too is the fact that he is reaching his possible potentials like later, quote unquote, in his career, is he knows what it means to go through adversity. He's talked about it yesterday at practice where he struggled in college. Maybe he struggled at the beginning of being a professional. And I can't overstate that enough of how important that is to be a professional and know what it means to deal with adversity, because so many guys get to the league having never dealt with that, maybe always being the top player wherever they play. And it's a big wake-up call in this league. Even jumping from the AHL to the NHL is an extremely different league, and the adjustment is bigger than maybe most fans would appreciate.
And you're seeing that with a lot of young players in this Predator system right now. You're seeing it with Juuse Saros, who's been sent back down. You've seen it with Philip Tomasino, who's back with the Milwaukee Admirals. You've seen it with Cody Glass and the growing pains he's had. I mean, it's kind of a testament to Carl Taylor, of course, a head coach for the Milwaukee Admirals, but it's also a testament to how Andrew Burnett is handling this. And I mean, we don't have to get into it too far, but Andrew Burnett's actually getting a couple nods from Jack Adams voters right now. Jack Adams Award for Best NHL Coach. I don't think he's going to win it, obviously, but he's at least getting some love and some attention around the league right now for the job that he has done with this Preds team. So let's move along here. We got Clay Brewer with us of Nashville Hockley Now. It's his second time joining the show, and we hope to have him on many more times in the future, of course. But let's get into last-minute trade deadline plans for the Predators. So we're coming to you on a Tuesday here. If you're watching later on YouTube channel, hit subscribe, or if you're watching, we'll upload this also to the other platforms so you can watch it in its entirety. I'm going to throw some players at you, Clay, and you give me your thoughts on each one here. Because with the 8-game winning streak, and of course with Novak now being re-signed, how does that shake up the ripple effect of the trade deadline plans now? Let's start with Alexandre Carrier, who I just really feel like he's going to be traded, but I could be wrong. What's your first thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm writing an article right now for Nashville Hockley Now, kind of diving into some of these players and what they might bring back. I've written previously that based on the trajectory of the team and kind of where Andrew Burnett's wanting to take the team, and then also who's in the pipeline, with Spencer Stosny, Mark Delgado, and others. I think Carrier brings a lot of value on the trade market, which is why he's one of the top of my list to potentially offload. And it's not because he doesn't fit in the system or I don't like him as a player. I just think that with him being a free agent this summer, you have to make tough decisions. So with this 8-game win streak and Trotz winning the playoffs and the playoffs being extremely important, it's tough to see him making any moves. But if I'm in Trotz's position, I do get something back for Carrier if I can, because I think a lot of contenders in a middle six role. So that second pairing, I think he could fit fill a lot of holes that are out there. He doesn't do any big flashy plays offensively or anything, but he doesn't really make any gasping errors either, which is what you need at this time of year.
Yeah. And, I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about where Trotz right now, he is basically having to be smart about his future with the team and trade the players he needs to trade, but he's also trying to keep this team playoff competitive. So he's trying to play both sides of the coin here. And so when I think about a player like Alexandre Carrier, if he's no longer on this team, let's say you get a draft pick or a prospect, but someone out of the deal that's not NHL ready, how does that affect the playoff push for the Predators or the Predators' chances of being competitive in a first-round playoff series, say against a Dallas or a Colorado or a Vancouver, which just absolutely should scare everybody because the Predators are 0-3 against the Canucks. But we'll save that conversation for another time. But my point is, Trotz is having to figure out, okay, I need to trade this guy. It's the right thing to do for the franchise long-term, but I also don't want to seriously downgrade this Preds team that is the hottest team in the NHL right now. I mean, that's a really hard thing to do for Trotz. I don't envy the man at all right now, going into his first trade deadline as a general manager. And it's not easy for this guy right now.
Right. I agree. And I've been kind of pushing this idea out there, so I'm curious in your thoughts. But a team, in my opinion, that a contender, for example, that would be interested in Carrier might be interested in Kevin Lankinen as well. I know we might get to the Saros conversation a bit later, but I've been a big proponent of Kevin Lankinen and how he's performing against maybe the top teams this year. I think his numbers are a bit depressed simply because he hasn't played that many games, not because of lack of skill or the ability to take over a certain position. Previously, I kind of floated out there Carrier and Lankinen to New Jersey with them slacking a bit. That doesn't make too much sense. It seems like they might want to shoot for Markstrom again or Saros this summer. But in Edmonton, for example, I know they're very cap constrained. And I'm getting off on a bit of a tangent here, but I've heard a lot of commentators speak about how Barry Trotz needs to weaponize the salary cap, right? So maybe be a third-party facilitator to another bigger deal to where Nashville will maybe get a third, fourth round pick to retain some salary, right? Because any team can retain 3 salaries per season. Nashville already has 2, so they have 1 slot left over. But maybe a bigger trade could be possible. So, for example, with Edmonton, you could get some of their prospects. If they want to offload Jack Campbell, for example, you could have them retain some money, give them Carrier and Lankinen, and then buy out Campbell. I want to weaponize the cap space much more than just getting a middle round pick. I don't think a third or fourth rounder does anything for you. And so if you're really wanting to weaponize the salary cap and roughly the $8 million that you have, I think that some big moves could be made that don't jeopardize the franchise for a playoff push or in the future.
Yeah. So we're being joined by Clay Brewer of Nashville Hockley Now on Catfish and Ice Podcast, episode 223, part of the Hockey Podcast Network, presented by DraftKings, promo code THPN. So I'm looking at Frank Saravelli's latest trade board today. It's a daily thing that I try to look at this time of year, but looking at it, dropped today. Today is March 5th, so a couple days before the trade deadline. And he's got Alexandre Carrier number 30 on the trade board. He had Carrier a lot higher. And basically, Saravelli argues that with this win streak that the Predators are on right now, that Nashville might be inclined to treat Carrier like their own rental, almost like they're more about winning in the playoffs now. And so they're afraid to trade a player like Carrier, which is kind of what I was hinting at earlier about Trotz having to play both sides here. He wants the team to stay playoff competitive, but he also wants to make the right decision for the front office, for the long-term future of the franchise. Very tough to do both. So Yeah, let's move to the next one here. Let's move to one that's a little bit more straightforward to trade, also on Frank Saravelli's trade board. And that is, of course, Tyson Barrie. He gets cheaper and cheaper every day to trade. It seems pretty inevitable that he's going to be traded. And interestingly enough, Saravelli ties Barrie to the Calgary Flames.
That's interesting. So this saga has kind of started in December when Elliot Friedman kind of came out with, I'm assuming from Barry's agent, that he wants to be left. He wants to leave Nashville, right? He's not comfortable, or whatever is happening. He's not comfortable being in Nashville for whatever reason. Maybe it's not being the number one guy on the power play behind.
Probably because he's
Right.
being healthy scratched constantly.
Right.
Probably
That's
has
true as
something
well.
to do with it.
Yeah, but I think with Tyson Barrie, so his AAV is 4.5 million. So if he were to be traded on March 8th on the deadline day, it would be 984,000 roughly that the team would have to absorb if Nashville didn't retain any salary. And I'm reading a lot that Barrie might not be getting any traction, but it could just be because there's no reason to trade now when you can trade on March 8th, right? So each day you kind of go by, there'll be 42 days left in the season come March 8th. And so that's roughly a daily cap hit of $23,000. And so if you would have traded for him 2 months ago, those dollars add up, especially with a team that's cap constrained, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how the Calgary situation would tie into this, because Barrie is, I believe, 32 years old. And so he's looking for that next contract, likely his last contract this summer. Does he just want to go kind of play for a team that's not going to make the playoffs and then test the market again? Will he re-sign there? It'll be really interesting. But I think the biggest thing for why he has not been moved is just simply because teams will wait till March 8th. Because in my opinion, when he has played over the last month, he's been fantastic. I mean, you don't have a Tyson Barrie on your roster because he's going to be a defensive powerhouse like a Ryan McDonough and just shut down Connor McDavid, right? You have him because he does just what's needed in the defensive zone to get the puck out quickly. And he's been great offensively when he's given the chance to be in the lineup. So that's my opinion. I think the only reason is just because the daily cap hit, and come March 8th, I think that he'll go to a team that's more competitive that would need his offensive talents. That's just my opinion.
I think I just feel like even with him being relatively cheap and he's a great locker room presence and all of that stuff, I just don't know how heavy the market's going to be interested in Barrie. I mean, it's going to be limited. I don't know if he's going to have a whole lot of options to choose. Oh, I don't want to go there because they're not a playoff contender, but we'll see. I do think he's definitely going to be traded. I mean, but to some
and the irony is, if you're making a playoff push, I mean, in my opinion, you want Barrie on your team, right? So it's kind of a catch-22 there, because again,
the Flames aren't completely out of it either. So
right.
You do expect them to be sellers, and they got some pretty big players, including Markstrom and Net, who's still being linked to the Devils, but almost like Saros, it looks like it might not happen. And then you've got Noah Hannafin as well, one of the top trade deadline players that are going to be out there. But let's move along here to some other players. We already brought up Kevin Lankinen. We expect him to probably be traded. Teams always need good backup goalie depth, because you never know when you're going to have an emergency switch in a playoff series. Let's say your game 1 and 2 starter just gets absolutely roasted, and you got to make an emergency switch. We see it happen all the time in playoff series where head coaches are like, I got to get a different goalie in there before we lose this thing and we fall down 3-0 in a playoff series. And they like to have a guy who they can trust as a 1B. You have a 1A and a 1B. Kevin Lankinen could be a 1B for a playoff team.
I agree. And it's super tough being a goaltender. I mean, we kind of saw at the beginning of this season, Juuse Saros struggling a bit. I would chalk that up to one. I mean, obviously playing a lot. I think he got tired, but also I think the Burnett system of just the changing, the different shot angles and things like that. It's very difficult for a goalie to change systems and everything in the middle of a season. But putting that aside, I think even Lankinen could be. I'm definitely going to be in the minority in saying this, but I'm going to say it anyways. I think he could be a starter for a contender. So a team that might be struggling goaltending wise, but have all the other pieces. Lankinen's not going to hurt you, but he might just add a bit more confidence to your lineup. of who you have between the pipes, as opposed to having to be scared every single night what might happen. I keep going back to the Edmonton Oilers just because I've been researching kind of numbers and things of how this might work. But Stuart Skinner's been great recently, but for a while there, I mean, they sent Jack Campbell down. He has what, a $3.5 million cap hit. So
Yeah.
the confidence, you have Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and you're sitting in the stands still scared that you might give up 8 goals a night, right? I think that Kevin Lankinen would be a cheap rental to maybe solve that kind of issue. So.
See, I keep thinking about the Colorado Avalanche just because they are a team that's a Stanley Cup or bust type of team. And do we trust Georgiev as their goalie that can for sure survive the long haul to the Stanley Cup? I wouldn't be surprised at all if Georgiev had to get yanked in a game 1 or a game 2 of a first round playoff series, and the Avs need someone to do. So I keep thinking about the Avalanche as a potential landing spot for Lankinen, but definitely a playoff team that doesn't feel, and the Oilers fit that narrative as well. A playoff team that doesn't feel 100% confident in their starter going into the playoffs should be very interested in a Kevin Lankinen, and you can get him for relatively cheap. And then maybe, just maybe, you can re-sign him as your starter for next season in the offseason. So very interesting stuff. Let's touch on one more player who I think is very likely to be traded, or he could get a new deal. It could go either way. And I want to get your thoughts on which thing you think ends up happening with this player. And that player is Yakov Trenin. He is a major wild card for me. I don't know what's going to happen with him. He could restructure a new deal with the Predators, and I know a lot of fans would be very, very happy about that, but he could also be traded. And I really don't know. I'm 50-50 on what could happen with Yakov Trenin. What do you think, Clay?
I agree. It's tough I think it really comes down to the numbers and what Andrew Burnett sees in Yakov Trenin as a part of his system. So Trenin is that stereotypical kind of former Predators way power forward, right? He has he has a lot of physicality. He has that kind of strong Russian style of skating, kind of heavy on his feet. But he also has some skill and brings some depth goal scoring that I think a lot of teams could use, even Nashville. I mean, he has 10 goals this season. Not earth-shattering, but I mean, 10 goals is hard to come by in this league, right? I think the biggest thing would be the number and where Burnett might see him fit. So I love him next to Colton Sissons. I think they make a great combo, and I think that Trenin with O'Reilly on the penalty kill has been really good this year down the stretch lately as well. But as we remember, 2 years ago, the Preds and Trenin kind of butted heads on a contract, and the arbitrator actually awarded him the $1.7 million for 2 years previously. So I think if he's wanting a raise, or if he's wanting to stay around that 1.7 range, I think it might be best to part ways. Not because I don't love the player, but just tough decisions, like I've said, have to be made. If he's wanting to take maybe a bit of a cut, be in the low 1 millions, I think he could be that third depth piece that Nashville needs. I've written previously that Nashville has a lot of depth pieces that could be offloaded for some assets, but they don't have those bona fide goal scorers that they really need. And so you have a lot of players playing in positions perhaps that they shouldn't be playing in. For example, like Colton Sissons for a while was a 2C. He's now kind of sliding down to the third center role. But things like that, I think it really comes down to numbers.
Here's what scares me about potentially trading away Trenin as it pertains to the playoff push, and maybe even finally winning a first-round series for the first time since 2018. Losing a player like Yakov Trenin and what he does on the penalty kill, and that's already a major weakness for this team as it is, even with Trenin in there. They have been doing a lot. I think they've shown gradual improvement on the penalty kill lately, and a lot of that, tip your cap to Juuse Saros, because who's your best penalty killer? A hot goaltender. So some of that has to do with that, but I do think the penalty killing has gotten slightly better, but it's still a major weakness, and it's probably the biggest question mark and the biggest reservation I have of the Predators being able to win a first-round playoff series if they do indeed make the playoffs this year. That's the biggest question mark I have for this team that makes me really question whether they can actually win a first-round series is
right.
You got to kill penalties off. Pretty much every team you're going to face in the playoffs is going to have an elite top 10 power play, most likely top 12 power play, somewhere in that neighborhood. If you can't kill penalties, you're in a lot of trouble. And losing a player like Trenin that'd be a major blow because I don't know who replaces Trenin in the penalty kill role.
I was about to say that. Yeah, I don't know. Just in general, in the lineup itself, there's no one in Milwaukee or anyone in my opinion that would replace what Trenin brings. So, if I would love to see a deal maybe signed this week. I know Elliot Friedman's mentioned that don't be surprised if a few more deals follow Novak. Perhaps I'm sure they're negotiating. Like a 1.2 for 2 years would interest me to keep Trenin on board. But again, if you want to raise or something, it can't happen, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I think if he's willing to take a slight pay cut and if he wants to be a part of what the Predators are doing right now and he likes where he's at and he's not just in it for the money, but he's actually in it because he wants to be a part of something special potentially, then maybe he does stay. And I hope that happens. I really do. I would love to see him stay for the right price, as you're saying. Clay. All right, so that's some good stuff there. We'll see what happens with all that. Still a lot that we have to figure out. We didn't even talk about some of the other pending unrestricted free agents coming up. We didn't even cover like a Kiefer Sherwood, Dennis Gurianov, any of those players who also could be traded or just let go in the offseason. We really don't know. But let's move on here. Going to talk about a few other things with Clay Brewer of Nashville Hockley Now. Until that happens, let's tell you about our current offer with DraftKings. Looking for a super offer for Super Bowl. Well, I'm reading the wrong script. Wow. Super Bowl is a little ways away, right? Didn't that already happen? Let's see. My script is not updated at all. All right, let's see. Here we go. Sorry about that, guys. All right. We know hockey games can move fast, but with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL, you can score faster than anything happening on the ice. This week, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 instantly in bonus bets. So, download the DraftKings Sportsbook app with code THPN. New customers bet just $5 on the NHL and get $200 instantly in bonus bets only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code THPN. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPENY or text HOPENY. That's 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-78-97777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas. 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction, void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See dkng.com/hockey for eligibility and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gaming resources. NHL and the NHL Shield are registered trademarks of the National Hockey League. Copyright NHL 2024. All rights reserved. When I saw Super Bowl, Clay, I was thinking, okay, something's not right here. Didn't the Super Bowl just happen?
Right? Just bet the Chiefs.
I know that my days are all halftime. I don't even know what day of the week it is, but I do know that the Super Bowl did already happen. All right, so yeah, good offer there with DraftKings with our promo code on our NHL offers. Right now, DraftKings has the Predators as minus 225 favorites on the money line against the Canadians tonight at home to see if they can get that win streak to 9. Some other interesting matchups tonight. You got the Seattle Kraken at the Winnipeg Jets, with the Jets being the favorites there, according to DraftKings. We've got a really, really intriguing matchup, in my opinion. The Canucks at the LA Kings. That is looking like a virtual toss-up, according to DraftKings. So there are some matchups to look forward to tonight with our promo code that you can use. All right, Clay, let's get to our next one. Let's talk about what's the roadmap now for Juuse Saros now that it looks like he's most likely not going to be traded, at least not at this deadline. It doesn't mean he couldn't be traded in the offseason. Doesn't mean that he's not traded as a rental goalie at next year's deadline. But as of now, it looks like he's most likely not going to be traded. Do you think that a long-term contract extension for Saros is now inevitable?
I definitely would not say inevitable. I think that this summer there's going to be a lot of conversations. Teams are going to be less constrained. The salary cap's going up. There's a variety of different avenues that could go into this. There could be a sign and trade to where they can get that extra year on Saros if the receiving team's wanting to do that. But no, I do not think it's inevitable. Nor do I think it's inevitable that he should be traded either. I don't think that by not trading him at this deadline, I don't think that the Preds are wasting an asset by all means.
And that also goes back to the whole playoff viability thing. And I know you're big on Kevin Lankinen, and you actually probably think that Kevin Lankinen could hold down the fort even if you did trade Saros in terms of making a playoff push. But yeah, I just got to wonder. And we've all been speculating about this since last summer, really. We've seen this coming down the road here. This is not something that just took us all by storm. We saw it writing on the wall when Yaroslav Askarov got drafted. Was when people first started really wondering, well, what does that mean for Saros' long-term future? We just drafted a goalie at number 11, which hardly ever happens in an NHL draft. 2 goalies go that high in the draft. So we've seen this coming for a long time, but now is the time where the chickens are coming home to roost and you got to figure something out. So I just wonder if Saros gets a long-term contract extension, that means that Yaroslav Askarov is going to have to be traded. Am I wrong? I mean, I don't see where they both coexist past maybe one season. They could be together next season, but that's all I see it.
Yeah, it seems like I'm in a bit of a minority here. I think Willie Donick kind of has a similar take on they can coexist, but the reason behind it might be a bit different than mine. But I've been a big proponent on platooning goaltenders. I think a 1A, 1B is the future of goaltending. I think the era of Martin Brodeurs, et cetera, playing 70-plus games is the way of the past. The league's too fast. The players are too good. And it's a hard game to play 60 minutes night in and night out. I think that they could coexist, and they could coexist for a next contract. I wrote an article previously about how that might look. So both Askarov and Saros will be free agents at the end of the 2024-25 season, so next summer.
Mm-hmm.
Saros would be a unrestricted free agent, which means he can do whatever he wants. Askarov would be a restricted free agent, which means that teams can try to poach him via an offer sheet. They can offer him certain monies, but essentially Nashville has the right to keep him, so the ball's in their court. I think that if look at the Tommy Novak deal, I mean, obviously Novak and Saros are in 2 different categories or calibers of players. But if you can get Saros into the low 7s, like 7.25, for example, and then sign Askarov to the middle 2s, low 3s, I think that's absolutely acceptable to have them coexist. And I was a big proponent of offloading Lankinen because I wanted Saros and Askarov to play together this last month of the season, whether they made the playoffs or not. When you get to the playoffs, you would ride the hot hand, so Saros probably. But then I think that leading up into this summer and then going into next season, splitting them, I think would benefit both parties. I think that Askarov would get much needed experience. Nashville would be able to see whether he is a bona fide starter or not. I mean, the biggest analogy that I kind of use to people lately is you don't want to trade or give up Tom Brady until you know Mac Jones is good, right?
Yeah,
So that's
good
kind
analogy.
of the big issue that people are having. You know, I believe Askarov is the future, but I'm not going to drop $4 million on him until he proves himself. You know, and I think that's absurd to say that to a guy who's played 3 games deserves to be paid that much. And then I don't think that it's a Pecorine Juuse Saros situation because one, Juuse Saros was no Askarov in the prospect pool coming up. No one had an idea, me included, that he would be as good as he's become. But also, Rene wasn't looking for a new contract either. He was 34 years old roughly at the time. He was still at his peak and playing well, but it's a completely different situation. The team was looking to offload Rene. They knew retirement was incoming. Here, I have no issues having 2-star goaltenders together, especially the cap going up, and if you can make it manageable. I don't know why that wouldn't be an issue. Look at the Boston Bruins. They've let it work.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I love the thought process. I really do. And it is a fresh approach because the overwhelming thought process is they can't coexist. And you got to either commit to one or the other, but you bring up a very, very valid point. And that is the days of riding one goaltender all the way till the end are over. The Predators are one of the few teams who still kind of stick to that trend of 60 plus starts for a goalie. Looks like it's going to happen again this year, most likely with Saros. I mean, you've got some other teams that have done that. You know, Connor Hellebuck with the Jets is the other goalie that's really just been ridden hard and will be again in the playoffs this year. But overall, teams are abandoning that approach. You're absolutely right. And it would be really cool to see Saros and Askarov be your 1-2 punch for the future. And you go with the hot hand when the time's right. I mean, I love the thinking behind that.
No matter what building you go into, you're confident in what you have between the pipes. I mean, David Riddick's a great man, but I mean, how many people were scared in game 1 and game 2 in Colorado in that series a few years ago with David Riddick starting and Saros being injured? I mean, that game 1 was an absolute disaster. That's just, you don't want that feeling going into a playoff series.
And I think that's why fans are still, they've got a little bit of bad nightmares going on here because they remember the last time this team was in the playoffs and how just how completely outmatched this Preds team was without Saros in net. And I've been on record of saying, even if Saros was in net for that series, I still don't know if the Predators, they might have gotten one win out of the series. They were just top to bottom. They were just, the Avs were a train. They ended up winning the Stanley Cup. So, good stuff. Let's wrap up our special edition episode 223 with Clay Brewer of Nashville Hockley Now. This is Chad Minton, your host of Catfish on Ice podcast, and let's talk about this 8-game winning streak. Clay, what switch has been flipped that's really stood out to you? Not saying that the Preds are going to win 11 in a row and set a franchise record, but how much longer can the Preds at least ride this hot streak, even if they take a loss or two here and there? Can they keep playing this winning style of hockey, surge into the playoffs? Last time I checked, the Preds aren't a foregone conclusion of not even maybe catching the top 3 of the playoffs. It's of the Central Division. It's not mathematically impossible. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's not mathematically impossible either. But how much longer do you think the Preds can bottle this up and really surge in these last 20 games?
Yeah, I think they've really reached that next level of coming together as a team. They have that grit. So, for example, I think the best example of this, I was talking to Ryan O'Reilly after the Colorado game. There was a moment when Gustav Nyquist was in the corner. He won the puck from Jack Johnson and then stole it from him and was going to the net and was hooked, and they got on a power play that then resulted in Tommy Novak's incredible goal on Bowen Byram. A month ago, you would not have seen that happen. They were getting dominated along the edges. The corner battles, they were losing every one of them. They just didn't seem to have that grit mentality. But now, like what Andrew Burnett likes to say, is everyone's pulling the rope, right, in the same direction. Everyone's on the same page. They're fighting for each other, and I think that's the biggest difference that's occurred here. The players are the same. The goal scoring, there's been a lot more depth goal scoring on this winning streak, which I think has contributed a whole lot. But they're not scoring 9 goals a game. Nothing's changed in that regard, right? They're winning the battles. And I think exhibit A of that was the Colorado game. And then they've only trailed for 10, 11 seconds this whole win streak. That was to the Wild. Yeah.
They're scoring first in, I think 7. I could be wrong, but I want to say it's 7 of these 8 games of this win streak. They've been the first team to score.
I think they've only trailed for 11 seconds because Yakov Trenin tied it up right after that. I didn't know that. I believe. I think it was the Wild game. 11 seconds. That's it.
I did not realize that.
Which is incredible. And they've won every game in regulation, so there's no flukes of an OT winner or a shootout winner, which those can go either way once you get to that point. But they've been decisive wins, 4-2, 5-1. And I think just the efforts there for being professionals.
I definitely see that for sure. I gotta give some love to just how the Predators are hampering down on the self-inflicted mistakes that they were having there for a while. They're playing a much cleaner brand of hockey. They're making the other team beat them, and they're the ones dictating the pace here, which goes along to what you're saying about winning the battles on the boards, winning the loose puck battles, not being your own worst enemy. I saw too many times when the Preds were really going the opposite direction of the direction they're going in now, where they just weren't doing anything to help themselves, and just this most recent win against the Avalanche, they dictated that game. Even when McKinnon did Nathan McKinnon things and just like a freaking laser beam, just shot up the ice and scored. Okay. You know what? Those things happen. What the Preds didn't let happen, and this is where I've really seen them switch their game, is they didn't let that snowball. They buckled up. They're like, okay, great elite players like Nathan McKinnon are going to beat you sometimes. let's not let that ruin this game that we're having right now. Let's not let that snowball into 2 or 3 other unanswered goals, because let's take back the momentum. Let's tip our cap to a great player, but let's take back the momentum here. And they did. They took it to the Avs like a boxing match, put them on the ropes. That team looked stunned. They started committing penalties because they were – what was the uncharacteristic penalty that I can't even remember which player took it for the Avs, but it was like an interference call, and it made no sense. It was by the benches.
Yeah, Devin Tays, I think, just lifted a stick up and went over Michael McCarron. Yeah, I remember
it was just
that.
a frustration. It was just
call, you know?
It was a total frustration penalty, in my opinion. Just because he knew, and that Avalanche team knew that the Preds were taking it to him, and the Avs were just. It was almost like they were done.
Yeah,
they had no answer for it.
And thinking back to that Colorado game again, I think it was textbook what Burnett wants to see and what you want to see in a hockey team. There's only 2 glaring issues. The first one was, like you said, on the goal that Nathan MacKinnon had, the turnover by Forsberg, and then Luke Schenn got caught low. But I mean, find me a goalie that saves that rocket, and I'll say you found yourself a winner, right? But then the second one, when Carrier on the other Nathan MacKinnon, Saros bailed him out, but Carrier got caught there. But other than that, I mean, they kept fighting, and that's a very, very good Colorado team with some incredible speed. So it's impressive what they're doing right now. And I think they can keep it up. I'm very curious what will happen. One, with, like you said at the outset of the pod, the next 3 teams are not playoff teams, how they respond to them. Preds have been kind of known for playing down to the opponent, which it'll be a big test at home. Home hasn't been their best playing field this year either. So in front of the home crowd, how they continue to push. And then when they do get that first loss, which is inevitable, I mean, maybe not, but I think it's inevitable, right? For the next 20 games or so, how they respond there. Is it a 2-1 tough loss? Is it a 6-1 loss like the New Jersey and Minnesota games? I think that'll really tell us who this team is, because yesterday at practice, everyone's smiling, everyone's cracking up and having jokes, but it still had that serious tone, right?
Yeah.
So what happens when you go through maybe another streak where things aren't going your way, goals are going in that you might have wished you had back, things like that.
And like you're saying about the how do they respond? Do they take a 6-1 loss? Do they keep it close? Even if let's say they lose to one of these next 3 opponents that you think the Preds should beat on paper, but also this team only has 2 overtime losses. I'm thinking about how much higher in the standings this team would be right now if they figured out to turn some of those regulation losses into overtime losses. I know we don't like to take the loser points here, which is what a lot of people call overtime losses, is loser points, but they still count in the standings. And you look at some of these teams who have like 8, 9, 10 overtime losses. I know the Kings have a ton of overtime losses. They're getting points. So you want to see the Preds at the very least not get ran out of the building, play the style that they're playing right now. And if nothing else, they might take a bad loss. They might take a fluky bounce and lose by 1 goal. But are you finding ways to get points? Are you finding ways to handle the business that you can handle on your own? Another thing, look at this. This is well documented, but the Preds by far lead the league in hits. And everyone thought that when Andrew Burnett took over, that the Preds were going to become a more finesse, stylish, type of team. And they still have that quality to them, but they're almost turned into a team best of both worlds. They have your Tommy Novaks and your players who can, Philip Forsberg, of course, Roman Josi, others who can make the flashy offensive plays, but they are still one of the hardest hitting teams in the league. And it says it right there, 1,560 hits at 5-on-5 hockey, which leads the next closest team, the Maple Leafs, who have 55 less hits at 5-on-5 than the Preds, the next closest team in the standings in that regard. So, man, kudos to the Predators for sticking to their identity but still figuring out a way to be offensive flashy too.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Lazans and McCarrons and Smiths and Trenins and Schenns of the world are really bringing what's needed on the back end. I think that's kind of the grit that Barry Trotz was looking for when he brought on people like Schenn. I know he can be a controversial player in Predators fan bases, but I think he serves a purpose.
And you know what he is? I've been very impressed by Luke Schenn lately. He has really stepped into the role that he was brought in here for, which is to be a big, massive body out there. He plays smart. He's not out there to score goals and rush the puck up the ice. I wish he wouldn't the only thing that scares me about Luke Shen, and I know you've probably noticed this real quick, sometimes he takes those blue line shots and they're so easily blocked, and then it turns into a breakaway the other way. Have you noticed that happens a lot with
Yeah,
Luke
sometimes
Shen?
his speed isn't his friend, so he gets
I
caught
need
down
him to
low,
reel
like that
that.
Nathan McKinnon goal. He got caught down low.
Yeah.
But if you're looking for Luke Shen to do certain things that he's not built to do, then you're going to be upset with him every single game, right? But he came in here for a purpose. That's to kind of throw his weight around, have a force to make sure that once a player maybe chips at Yossi or chips at Saros, that's the last time they do it. That's kind of his purpose, right?
I
He seems like
think
he's probably getting more into the swing of things now that he was injured for the first 20 games or so. So you got to take that into account. But yeah, I think right now Burnett wishes he probably had a bit more offensive inclinations with some of his players. I don't think he necessarily has I've said this before, the horses for the race he wants to run. But he's making do, right? And I think that's very accommodating to him and what he's done as a coach this season. But that's why, kind of going back to our whole premise of this conversation here, is I wish the Preds would do something at the deadline just to kind of offload some of those depth pieces. I know you're in a tough spot, but we'll see.
All right. It's been an awesome conversation. This has been Clay Brewer joining episode 223 of Catfish on Ice with your host, Chad Minton. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, hit subscribe, rate the video, comment in the sections about all the stuff that we talked about this afternoon. It's been a lot of good stuff. The next time we see you on Catfish on Ice, it will be after the trade deadline. So plenty to get into once that time comes. Until then, Clay, thank you so much, man. We will have you back on in the future for sure.
Thanks for having me. Always enjoy it.
All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. We'll see you later on for the next episode. Until then, take care.